Change is part of our life, and when we need to embrace change, many times we're hesitant. What really stops us is fear. So the question really is, how do you overcome fear and embrace change? That's exactly what we're going to discuss in this episode of the Zista Podcast. Welcome to the Zista Podcast, where we invite industry leaders and academicians to answer questions that students have. Today's episode is a little different. We're not really focusing on a particular subject like which you study, but it's something that affects all of us. Change is part of our life, and therefore our ability to overcome fear and embrace change is really important. Joining us today is Priya Hajela, a former corporate powerhouse who has worked in the field of IT and telecom with leading brands like Tata Communications, IBM, Reliance Communications, Tech Mahindra, and the US. She was also working with Quest Communications. Her experience covers product and project management, HR, sales, and marketing. Now imagine this. After a successful corporate journey over a span of 22 years, she decided to embark on an extraordinary journey of her own, one that led her to embrace her passion for fiction writing. Priya's decision to leave the corporate world behind and pursue her dream is nothing short of remarkable. Today, we'll delve into her courageous path, exploring how she overcame fear to follow her heart and redefine her life. Thank you for making time for joining us, Priya. We're delighted to have you here with us today.
Good to be here.
Fantastic. So let me start by asking you, what inspired you to write your debut novel, Lady Tailor?
So the short answer is my grandparents. My grandparents moved during partition from Pakistan to India. But I think the longer answer, the better answer is that partition was the backdrop. And partition was, I think the most difficult, possibly the most complex time that any generation could have faced. So setting a story in that time was something that would help me create characters who had to make a lot of decisions. So my objective in writing this story was not to tell the story of partition. So there's not very much, I don't go on and on about partition. My objective in writing this story set in the time of partition, when it could have been set in any very difficult, complicated time, was to see and show how people make, when the shit hits the fan, so to speak, how people handle that. How do people make decisions? How do people figure out which course they're going to take? So my characters are, like I said, they could have survived and thrived in any time because of the way that they made their decisions. And what I kind of wanted to focus on is how, your intelligence, your experiences, your sensibilities, your, general inclinations, plus a kind of a healthy mix of the outcome, the sort of the ability to handle failure, the ability to handle very, very, very stressful situations. All of that kind of help you decide which, what course of action you're going to take. So that's what the story is about. The story is set in partition, but it is about characters who have to make those really, really difficult decisions. So that's kind of, the inspiration, because that's what we all do in life. That's what I think is the most important part of, my life. What has changed the course of my life is the decisions I've made.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I remember, I'm sorry for deviating to quantum mechanics, but there's this many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which actually says that every time you make a decision, your specific universe splits into two specific universes, where in one universe you've taken decision A, in another universe you've taken decision B, It's really interesting. I'm absolutely with you that the decisions we take actually impact us in more ways than one, right? Let me ask you another question. What you've done is really you've taken a big step away from a really successful career in IT and telecom. You work with some great brands like Tata Communications, Reliance Communications, Tech Mahindra, IBM, to name a few. And now you've moved on to become a fictional writer. So, from your perspective, what was the most challenging thing you faced when you stepped into the world of creative writing? And how did that entire process change you as a person?
So, in the corporate world, I mean, I've spent 22 years there, um, and um, and in the US and in India, and I think you know you work hard, and eventually you get promoted
Sure.
up to a certain point. After that, you play politics right, and you get promoted. And then, there is the progression. There is a generally accepted progression that you will grow, you will make more money, you will have more responsibility, and so on, right? Um, as a writer, it is every day, every day. I work. I write like I work. So
Right.
I sit at my desk. This is my office. I sit at my desk and I write. And every day is a struggle. Every day, and it doesn't matter how much I've written, or how many I've written. Like I actually have 3 manuscripts, and I'm working on my fourth.
Wow.
So it doesn't matter. Every day is a struggle. So first you got through the writing, you finish something, then you have to get into finding somebody to buy it. Then it gets published, and then you have to market it. I mean, it is an impulse. It's the chances of success, the chances of failure way overwhelm the chances of success. So the reason the reason I do it, when I have unstinting support from my partner, my spouse, my husband, and he's absolutely, no question, listens to me reading all kinds of stuff. The other thing is I have undying belief in myself, which is which is very difficult to say out loud, but it's something that is really important for when you're doing something that is very, very internally driven. When there are no external factors at play until the book is written. Once the book is written, there's a lot of external factors, and you have to, you have to deal with all of that. But while you're writing the book, you are all alone, right? So, um, it was a huge challenge to not have 50 emails every day to go through, to have people who need you, who need you to make decisions. You've just got to do everything just for yourself and for your book. So not an easy decision, but a really good one.
I'm happy, you actually put it out that way. And I think having a supportive partner, or for that matter, a supportive environment for people who don't have partners, I think that's so important for our personal success. What I wanted to ask you a little bit more was that, today we're focusing on how you can overcome fear and embrace change. Well, when I look at you, you've certainly embraced change over the course of your career, and then, of course, moving on to become a fictional writer. But, I wanted to ask you to also maybe tell us, when you took this decision and when you walked down that path, did you face any fears or insecurities? And if yes, how did you overcome them?
So, one of my most, I think, difficult experiences, one of the things that I really struggled with in my corporate life was this, and it was interesting. It happened everywhere. It happened in Reliance. It happened in IBM. It was this thing where, people, it was gender bias.
Okay.
So it's not gender bias in the sense that I didn't get the job that I wanted or anything like that. It was more about, this might be too much for you. This might not, that you may not want to work, this late or travel this much, or, things of that nature, right?
So some stereotyping, you would say? like gender stereotypes?
I don't know if it was, it probably was, I mean, stereotyping, or, maybe it's like, we're taking a personal interest in your well-being, and, like in a very patriarchal way. And it's, it's something that, one had to kind of fight off and struggle with, right? And in in writing fiction, though, that sort of a thing it's like magnified to an extent that you can't even imagine, because you have to, um you have to write. Sometimes sometimes people say you have to write for an audience, and I can't do that. I have to write what I want to write. It's not acceptable. It is not. I have had rejections. I can't even begin to count how many times Lady Sailor has been rejected, how many times my other two, and the kind of feedback. Those things, if you've gone through it in your corporate life, it is literally like 100 times worse, in terms of failure, setbacks, rejections. Um, it's something that you just absorb and you go on. And what I did was, before I started writing my novel, or, as I was writing my novel, I wrote a lot of short stories. And I kind of made a very progressive sort of, I've been doing this for almost 9 years. And I think this is the advice that I like to give it. First of all, you can't do this. You can't be a writer as a first career. It is too daunting. I think there are people who are very, very good, and but it's a minuscule portion. Second is that once you start writing, you have to take it in you have to take little bites.
No.
I started writing short stories. My short stories were rejected a lot, but then gradually, I think all of my short stories, I've written about 10 or 12, and all of them have been placed here and there, which was very heartening, but it took a long time. And then the novel, because then you can say, okay, I have written short stories and I published them, and so now here's my novel, which gives you something of a stepping stone. So, but the failure and the rejection is endless. It is endless. Even after the even if after the book is published, will people read it? Will people like it? Will people pan it? Will people say mean things? It just is you just have to develop a really thick skin and go on.
I think, what you're saying, I can relate to that, because when you're talking about putting your work out there versus being in a corporate environment, I would imagine it's a lot more personal to start with. And one thing that you mentioned, that don't let any kind of failure or rejection deter you. And I think so often, sometimes if we fail once or maybe twice, we may adopt a mindset which says, okay, I think this is it. It's time to give up. But the fact that you kept laboring on, that you believed in what you're doing is good, and you kept at, you kept at it, you stayed at it, that's what's allowed you to progress from short stories to a novel. And now you're published by HarperCollins, which is a fantastic publisher. And I must confess, I haven't read Lady Tailor. I'm planning to go and get myself a copy, but I was reading some reviews and some of them were really nice. So it's so amazing that, if you stick to your knitting, if you kind of just stick to your belief and don't deviate, there's a lot of good that can actually come out of that, I wanted to ask you, Priya, there's always an element of the unknown that crosses our minds, before we're embarking on a new path or a new venture. So, when you try something new, how do you prepare yourself from a mindset perspective, from a attitude perspective? If you could give students some tips on that, it would really help, because they're bound to face failure or rejection, as the case may be.
Yeah, and I want to tell a little story about my daughter,
Okay.
who's 20, and she's in college, in the US. And she had she studied French for good like 9 years of school. So she went to school here in Pune, and she studied French, and then she decided that she wanted to go to UWC. And this was her decision entirely. And I was a little kind of, not so happy about her leaving early, but she said, I want to go. And she got in and she went to Costa Rica for United World College for 2 years, for 11th and 12th. And she switched to Spanish.
Okay.
And as her, her language, she did Spanish ab initio, because in the 11th and 12th, you can do that. You can do a brand new language. So she'd been studying French all this time. She switched to Spanish, and she kind of, liked it. And she then, went to college right in 2020, August of 2020, right at the start of COVID. And but we could send her. We were able to send her because she was born in the US. So we were able to send her to the college. So she went and she said, I'm not too sure, but I think I want to continue Spanish. And she continued Spanish just on a whim. And then went on with it. And during COVID, because everything was online still, they were in the dorms, but everything was online, it got quite intense. And, she really kind of got into it. Then she said, I want to study abroad. She did a whole year of Spanish abroad. Now she's a Spanish major, fluent, lived in 2 countries with 2 families who spoke no English. She
Okay.
like homestays, right? In both,
Right.
they had the option of a dorm, but she did the homestay. Stayed with families in their homes with no spoken English on their on their part. They did not understand. They was one pretending not to speak English, could not speak English.
Trial by fire, really.
Yes, and the thing is, I am very inspired by her, because hopefully it's kind of she was inspired by me, and now she's inspiring me, which is how I think it should be. I was very inspired by her to take on something like this, to go and live there in somebody else's house. And I was totally impressed. But the thing is that when you think that you want to do something, first of all, where is that coming from? Is it coming from a place of like really, that it's meaningful and you really want to do it? Or is it are you copying someone? Are you trying to keep up with someone? Is it just something that you think will make you look cool? So you can work that out, because once you know why you want to do it, there's nothing that can stop you. Once you truly understand why that there's something that you want to do, there is absolutely nothing that's going to stop you. And that's how I feel about writing, which is, I can tell you that it has been I wanted to give up. I have gone back and written to my former employers. I've written to, we were talking about, some of the Tata guys. I've written to many of them.
Okay.
And said, yeah, I need to come back to work. I can't do this anymore. I need to get a job. But I have done that. But I have, then kind of said, okay, let me stick to it. Just one more month. So it had to be like that. And I think if you believe it, eventually it does work out. So.
Yeah, there was one thing I kind of hung on to. Do it for the right reasons. Do it if you're really motivated. Because if you're not, it's easy to fall flat on your face. And I think that's really right. So I understand it's important also to push yourself. But this brings me to the last question. How do you strike a balance between pushing yourself and respecting your own limits?
This is a really it's a really good one, because I did push myself a lot out of my comfort zone while I was working. As I said, I did not appreciate this, you're a woman, you should not travel, and you should not, is this too much for you? And I pushed myself, and I said, what the hell, I can do whatever you men can. But I reached a point where I said, it is taking away from my family and my kids, and I barely see them. And so I decided to take a step back, and I found balance. And I have balanced, I kind of created that balance for myself, and I left. There were times when, things were going on, and I said, I'm sorry, it's my daughter's birthday. I need to get back home in time. And I'm leaving. From Bombay, I drove back because I needed to get back. I had to get back, and birthdays come every year and all that. But yeah, it was something that I needed to do, so I left. There's one particular event, a big event that was going on, that I was a part of, and then I said I have to go. In with writing, it's very easy to overestimate your own abilities, especially when you're young, when you're a young early writer, I should say. I'm not young, but I think it's very important to um, assess and understand your abilities. And even if you don't, you have to accept where you are. I am a big fan of Amitav Ghosh. I like the way he writes. I like his
Sure.
historical fiction and his research. He has, he's a he inspires me. I hope to write like him someday. I do not at the moment. I may not ever be able to write like him, and I have to accept that. And so that's where the balance, that is where I kind of feel that that kind of balance comes in, is that if at some point I can accept my capabilities and match them to my aspirations, which I think is a flaw that a lot of young people experience, is that their aspirations are here, but their abilities are kind of, there's a bit of a gap. But that happens, I think, to all of us. And I want to write like him. I will try to write like him. I will not beat myself up if I'm not able to. And I will accept that this is, where, as far as I can go. So
I think that's rock solid advice. And, in a way, I think in the course of this podcast, what you've done is not only cover on the topic on how you can overcome fear and embrace change, but you've also given us a good insight into the mind and into the life of a writer, of a fictional writer, about how it may not always be easy, how you need to be ready and prepared to go through a struggle if required, but really be completely aware of your own skills, assess yourself, be realistic, let that be in sync with your aspirations, but keep motoring on, keep moving on, because the only way forward is to grow. And I think growth is so amazing. When we stop growing, we tend to become static, and then sometimes we may swim in negative thoughts, perhaps swim in some of the negative criticism that we may receive. But it's important to have some way to kind of flush out that negativism, that negativity, and just focus on what you really need to do. And I think you've managed to do that. I'm so happy to hear that you're actually working on so many different manuscripts in parallel. Is there any specific book that should which is closer to completion? Anything you'd like to tell us before we wrap?
So, I want to tell you about a couple of things that I've done. One is I'm working on a manuscript, a big book,
Okay.
which is another historical novel, which is tracking the lives of the predecessors to my character in Lady Tailor. So it's his uncle and his grandfather and his great grandfather. It goes back
Okay.
back in time to the mid 1800s. The other thing that I did recently, which I think is sort of the thing that I said, one must keep doing so that you don't feel like, you're basically honing. You're always honing, your craft or whatever it is that you're doing. So I work with an organization in Pune called SVP. It's Social Venture Partners. It's a philanthropic organization, and we support 7 NGOs and in Pune. And there was an event where we had to, a lot of people were coming in from different parts of the country, and we had to put up something to talk about those NGOs. And the classic approach is a PPT, which I do not do anymore. I stay away from. I've tried to remove the PowerPoint app from my. Unfortunately, I have Microsoft 365, so I can't. But I said no PPT, please. Okay, so let's do something different. And what we did was I wrote stories. I wrote founder stories. I spoke to the founders of the 7 NGOs, and I wrote these. I wrote I wrote them as characters. They have characters, and their story right from the beginning. What motivated them? What got them to where they were? Like it's a short story, not like it's a PPT I'm not talking about the NGO. I'm not talking about how many people you've impacted. I'm talking about you. How did you get to where you are and what you're doing? And then we had a group of storytellers, 4 storytellers, like they're professional storytellers who told the stories at this event, and it was very well received because it was very different and unique. So I just finished that, and I'm working on my novel, which I'm hoping to finish in a few months.
It's fine, good things take time. Let it bake. And I'm sure you're going to have a really good end product. And, I just like to say thank you, Priya, for making time in your day, for telling us a little bit about what you've been doing, but even more covering about how you've so wholeheartedly embraced change, faced fear, faced rejection, and kept moving on. So that's, I'm sure, going to inspire some young minds out there. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Priya touched upon some really important aspects. What really stayed with me is how you really need to just stay committed to what you're doing, really believe in yourself, not get affected by fear and rejection, and be open to change. And the more often you do that, you're taking small steps to overcoming fear and not letting fear cripple any part of your life. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get more content like this, and you can certainly follow us on our podcast platforms like Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Spotify. Our handle is the Zista Podcast. Till we're back with another riveting episode, our advice would be stay curious.